Here is something nobody tells us about marriage. We are doing it backwards. Think about it. You wouldn't buy a house without an inspection. You wouldn't take a job without asking about salary. You wouldn't adopt a dog without meeting it first. But marriage, the single most consequential contract you will ever sign, legally binding you to another person's debts, their family, their sexual expectations, their vision of parenthood, their definition of cleanliness, their trauma, their money habits, their secrets. We just hope for the best. We call it taking a leap of faith. We say, when you know, you know. We treat the most complex partnership humans can form as something that should feel effortless, natural, obvious. And then we act surprised when 40 to 50% of marriages end in divorce, with the survivors citing the same issues over and over: money fights, sexual disconnection, and communication breakdowns. Here is the uncomfortable truth: these aren't failures of love, they are failures of due diligence. They are the predictable result of two people who never had the conversations that actually matter. Because we have been taught that asking the hard questions means you don't trust each other. That if you really loved someone, you wouldn't need to discuss how often you expect to have sex or who is paying off whose credit card debts. That talking about money is unromantic. That planning kills passion. But here is what nobody mentions: so does resentment, so does financial stress, so does discovering 5 years in that your partner thinks sex twice a month is generous while you are dying of neglect. So does realizing your parents' teen philosophies are fundamentally incompatible when your kid is already 3 years old and the damage is done. The wedding industry is worth $70 billion dollars. We spend an average of $30,000 on a single day, but we spend virtually nothing preparing for the marriage itself, for the 18,000 days that follow. This isn't just ironic, it's insane. We have built an entire romantic industrial complex designed to help you avoid reality. Every rom-com teaches the same lesson. If you have to try, if you have to negotiate, if you have to ask difficult questions, it is not real love. Because, according to rom-coms, real love is effortless. Real love just knows. Real love is that moment when your eyes meet across a crowded room and somehow magically you just understand each other. Except you don't. You absolutely don't. What you understand is that you're attracted to each other, that you enjoy each other's company, that you share some values and laugh at the same jokes, and those things matter. But they tell you almost nothing about whether you can build a life together. Because here is what happens next: you fall into those gendered scripts that make honesty nearly impossible. For men, you are taught that vulnerability is weakness, that asking questions about emotional needs makes you needy, that admitting you don't know how to communicate during conflicts makes you less of a man. So you stay silent about the things that terrify you. But she still wants me if I lose my job. Can I tell her I'm struggling? What if my version of intimacy isn't enough for her? I hope they'll sort themselves out. Well, they won't. For women, we are taught that practical questions make us gold diggers, that asking about sexual compatibility makes us improper, that expressing clear expectations makes us demanding. So we perform certainty we don't feel, pretending we don't care about his depth, his career trajectory, whether he will be an equal partner in parenting or another child for us to manage. Because admitting we are evaluating him feels like we are failing at love. But evaluation isn't the opposite of love, it is the prerequisite. The results? Couples enter marriage with catastrophic information asymmetries. He assumes she will want sex as often as he does. She assumes he will naturally split household labor. He thinks they agree on having kids. She thinks they agree on how to raise them. They are both wrong. We are all wrong, but we won't find out until the lease is signed, the wedding is over, and the exit costs are devastating. And then here's the cruelest part. When the marriage struggles, we blame the individuals. They didn't try hard enough. They gave up too easily. They stopped making it a priority. But really, you can't try your way out of fundamental incompatibility now, can you? You can't prioritize your way into sexual chemistry that was never there. You can't work harder at a partnership built on assumptions that were never verified. The problem wasn't insufficient effort. The problem was insufficient information. Maybe I could be direct to the men watching this. The questions you need to ask your partner are the exact questions that terrify you because they are not really about her, they're about you. Can we talk about money? You need to know her debts, her income, her credit score, her relationship with spending and saving, whether she sees money as security or freedom, whether debt is a tool or a failure, whether your financial philosophies are compatible or catastrophically opposed. But asking requires disclosing your own numbers, your own debts, your own salary, which might be less than you want it to be, less than you told yourself you would be making by now, less than your father made at your age. It requires admitting you are not entirely in control, not entirely secure, not entirely the provider you thought you would be. Why does this matter? It matters because money fights aren't really about money. They are about power, autonomy, values, and fear. When you discover 3 years into marriage that she's been hiding credit card debts or you have been secretly resenting her spending, you are not just fighting about the budgets, you're fighting about whether you can trust each other with the truth. Have the conversation before the joint checking accounts, before the mortgage, before you're too invested to walk away from incompatibility you could have discovered over coffee. Another question: what do you actually need from sex? Not what you hope she needs, not what porn taught you she should need. What does she need in terms of frequency, variety, initiation style, the conditions that make her feel safe enough to be vulnerable, the boundaries that absolutely cannot be crossed. And this is the part that is even harder. What do you need? You, the man, what do you need? Not just physically, but emotionally as well. Do you need sex to feel loved? Do you need her to initiate sometimes? What happens to your self worth when she is not interested? Most men would rather die than have this conversation because it risks discovering you are incompatible. It risks her rejecting something you need. It risks exposing that your confidence is more fragile than you pretend. And this is what happens if you don't. You get married. The initial passion settles into routine. Life gets stressful. Frequency drops, and suddenly you are in a sexless marriage wondering what happened. Well, what happened is that you never established what normal looked like for either of you. You never created a framework for navigating mismatched desire. You just assumed it would work out. Assumption is not a strategy, it is a gamble with your happiness as the stakes. Another question men should ask: how do you want to raise children? Not whether you want them. How? Because we both want kids tells you nothing about whether you will be compatible parents. Will you spank? Will you cause sleep? What role does religion play? How much screen time? Public school or private? Helicopter or free range? And when you disagree, because you will disagree, how do you resolve it? Does one parent's opinion override the others? Do you defer to whoever feels more strongly? Do you compromise? And what does that look like when you are exhausted and the child is screaming? These questions feel hypothetical until there's a real child and real stakes. And by then, you are not evaluating compatibility, you are negotiating conflict in real time, both exhausted, both certain you're right, both realizing too late that your partner's childhood taught them completely different lessons from yours. And before the pregnancy test, ask this before the pregnancy test, before the ring, while you still have the option to walk away from incompatibility that will poison everything. Another question: how do you handle conflicts? When she's angry, does she need space or presence? When you're hurt, do you withdraw or explode? What does resolution look like to you? Apologies, changed behavior, or time passing? Can she fight fair or does she weaponize your vulnerabilities? Can you hear criticism without shutting down? This is the question men avoid because it requires admitting we might not be good at this, that we might shut down emotionally, that we might respond to relationship problems the way our fathers did by working more hours, saying less, hoping it blows over. But emotional incompatibility is a slow poison. It does not kill the relationship immediately, it just makes both of you lonelier every year. You end up married to someone you cannot actually talk to, living with a stranger who knows your credit card number but not your fears. Test this before you promise forever. Fight about something small and watch what happens. Does she fight to understand or to win? Do you listen or defend? Can you repair the rupture or does it just add to the pile of unresolved resentments you are both quietly cataloging? Another question: who is doing the invisible work? Not just who is cooking dinner, who is planning meals, making grocery lists, remembering birthdays, scheduling appointments, tracking the family calendar, noticing when the toilet paper is running low, managing your social life, remembering what size clothes your kids wear. Because when you get married assuming we'll figure it out, somehow figuring it out means she's doing 70% of the cognitive labor while you are available to help when asked. And that word help reveals everything. You can't help with something that is supposed to be your joint responsibility now, can you? That's just doing your share. But most men won't have this conversation because it requires acknowledging that equality doesn't just happen, that our mothers managed everything so seamlessly we genuinely don't see all the work, that we might be planning to coast on assumptions we haven't examined. And then 10 years in, she's exhausted and resentful, and you're confused because you help out, and it's still not enough. And neither of you knows how to fix it because you never established what fair meant in the first place. Now to the female inquiry, the questions that threaten romance. Our hard questions are the ones that make us feel like we are betraying some ideal of unconditional love. But unconditional love is for children and dogs. Marriage is a partnership, and partnerships require conditions. Are you financially responsible? Or am I going to be your mother? That is question number one. You need to see his credit score, his debts, his savings accounts, his relationship with money. Does he pay bills on time or procrastinate until there are late fees? Does he have an emergency fund or live paycheck to paycheck? Can he delay gratification or does he buy whatever catches his eye? This feels materialistic to ask, like you're screening him for earning potential rather than loving him for who he is. But here's the reality: financial irresponsibility it isn't a quirk, it isn't something that can be managed. It is a character reveal. It tells us whether he can plan, whether he can handle uncomfortable obligations, whether he'll be a partner or another dependent. Because the woman who marries a financially chaotic man does not get a fun, spontaneous free spirit. She gets someone whose impulse purchases threaten the mortgage payments, whose lack of planning becomes her own emergency, whose refusal to grow up becomes her problem to manage. Ask before you're gently liable for his decisions, before his debt becomes yours, before you're explaining to your children why they can't have something because daddy made another mistake. Second question: what does commitment actually mean to you? Not the vague romantic version, the specific operational version. Does marriage mean forever, full stop? Or does it mean until it stops serving me? What constitutes grounds for divorce? Infidelity, abuse, growing apart, or getting bored? How does it view difficulty? As something to endure together or a sign to cut losses? When things get hard, and they will get hard, does it lean in or look for exits? And what about his family? Are you marrying him or his mother's expectations? Will his parents have veto power over major decisions? Are you expected to absorb his family's dysfunction and call it love? These questions feel unromantic because they acknowledge that commitment isn't universal, that his forever may mean something completely different than yours, that you may think you're agreeing to the same contract while actually signing different terms. Find out now, before your life is entangled with his, before you have given up opportunities, relocated, or built your world around someone whose definition of partnership is fundamentally incompatible with yours. Third question for women to ask their men: are you emotionally available or am I going to be lonely in this marriage? Some of these questions can't be asked explicitly, but they are questions that should be should be considered. Can he identify and articulate emotions beyond anger and contentment? Will he engage in difficult conversations or shut down? Can he apologize without defensiveness? Will he go to therapy if needed, or does he see mental health support as weakness. Because this is what nobody tells us. We can be married and desperately lonely. You can share a bed with someone who is fundamentally unavailable for emotional intimacy, who loves you in some abstract sense but cannot meet you in your actual emotional reality. And for many women, this is worse. It is a worse fate than being alone because at least alone you're not pretending. You are not performing gratitude for the crumbs of emotional engagement he occasionally offers. You are not slowly dying of neglect while telling yourself this is what marriage is supposed to be. Test his emotional range now. Have the hard conversations. Express needs. Show vulnerability. And watch what he does. Does he rise to meet you or retreat into comfort? Does he hear you or defend himself? Can he sit with his discomfort or does he need to fix it, dismiss it, or flee? He doesn't have to be 100%. Um, you know, guys process emotions differently from women, but at least understand what you're getting into. So, 5 years down the line, you don't end up calling this emotionally immature person because he never learns that language, and then you just label him a narcissist when the problem is he just never learned the language of emotions. Because if he can't be emotionally present during courtship when he is trying to impress you, he won't magically develop the capacity after the wedding. Another question: what do you expect sexually? Frequency, initiation, boundaries. What happens when one person wants sex and the other does not? Whether sex is connection or just release. What he does when you're not in the mood. How he handles rejection. This is the conversation that feels most dangerous because it risks exposing incompatibility that might end the relationship. But that is exactly why you need to have it now rather than 5 years in when you're locked into a pattern that makes you both miserable. Because mismatched desire is brutal. If you need sex to feel connected twice a week and is satisfied once a month, one of you will always be disappointed, always feeling rejected or pressured, always resentful. And here is the darker question women need to ask: how does he respond when you say no? Does he respect it immediately or does he pout, pressure, or guilt? Does he see your consent as optional once you're married or as a given? These aren't hypotheticals. These are previews of your sexual future. Watch carefully. Another question is: will you be a partner or another child for me to manage? Does he notice when things need doing or does he wait to be told? Can he plan a meal, execute it, and clean up without instructions? Does he track his own schedule or expect it to be his calendar? When you're sick, can he manage the household or does everything fall apart? Because women are drowning in weaponized incompetence. Men who have discovered that if they do the task badly enough, often enough, their partners will just do it themselves. Men who claim they don't see mess, who forget important dates, who need to be reminded about their own responsibilities. And the cruelest part, they are not actually incompetent. They manage complex tasks at work just fine. They remember sports statistics and video game strategies without help. The incompetence is selective, deployed strategically in domestic contexts where women have been socialized to pick up the slack. Test this before marriage. See what he does when you're not there to manage. Does he handle life independently or does he need rescue? Because if you're going to spend your marriage as his manager, you need to know that now, when he can still choose differently. And here is the deeper part. Why don't we have these conversations? If they are so obviously critical, what stops us? Number one, fear. Fear that asking means you don't trust them. Fear that the answer will be incompatible. Fear that you will seem difficult, demanding, unromantic. Fear that if you can't accept them exactly as they are, flaws and all, you don't really love them. But here's what fear actually reveals. We have confused acceptance with ignorance. We think not asking questions means we are more trusting, more open, more loving. But ignorance is not acceptance, it is avoidance. It is choosing temporary comfort over long term compatibility. And psychologically, we are wired for this avoidance. We engage in optimistic projection, assuming our partner shares our values until proven otherwise. We see what we want to see. We interpret ambiguity in our favor. We mistake good chemistry for complete compatibility. The research is unambiguous, however. Couples who engage in structured premarital discussion about finances, sex, parenting, conflict resolution, and domestic labor report higher satisfaction and lower divorce rates. The mechanism isn't mysterious. Explicit negotiation reduces unmet expectations and creates frameworks for addressing future conflicts. But knowing this doesn't make the conversations easier because they require skills most of us never learned. Articulating needs without blame, hearing criticism without defensiveness, negotiating without ultimatums, holding boundaries without cruelty. We are taught to fall in love. We are never taught to build partnerships. We need to reframe discomfort as diagnostic rather than destructive. If you can't discuss money before marriage, how will you negotiate a mortgage? If sexual needs can't be articulated during courtship, how will you address them in the exhaustion of parenthood? If conflict makes you shut down now, what happens when the stakes are real? The conversation that feels awkward is often the one revealing critical incompatibility and discovering that Incompatibility before legal and financial entanglement isn't failure, it is wisdom. It requires systematic inquiry. Don't wait for topics to arise organically. Create space to deliberately address every domain where misalignment would be catastrophic: finances, sex, parenting, domestic labor, conflicts, extended family, career priorities, lifestyle expectations, and other deal breakers. Secondly, set um, concrete specificity. Abstract agreement means nothing. We both value financial responsibility is useless without numbers. What is your debt? What is your income? What is your credit score? Show me your bank account. Show me your budget. Let me see the actual reality, not the aspirational story. Thirdly, engage in consequence mapping. For each area, project forward. If we agree about this 5 years from now, how will we resolve it? This forces acknowledgement that compatibility is not permanent. It requires ongoing negotiation. Fourthly, have exit rights. Paradoxically, discussing conditions under which the marriage might end strengthens commitment by establishing that it is chosen rather than trapped. What is a deal breaker? What would require renegotiation? When is it ethical to leave? This is not unromantic, it is actually romantic. In the original sense of the word, romance isn't pretending difficulties don't exist. Romance is choosing to build something together despite difficulty, with open eyes, with clear terms, with honest acknowledgement of what you are both bringing to the table. The healthiest marriages are not built on effortless compatibility. They are constructed through deliberate inquiry into areas where incompatibility would be catastrophic. This requires courage, the courage to ask questions whose answers might end the relationship, the courage to be honest about needs that might make you seem difficult, the courage to admit you don't know if this will work. But that courage is also respect. Respect for yourself and your partner. Because when you ask questions, you are giving both of you the chance to consent to the actual relationship rather than an imagined one. You're saying, here is who I really am. Here is what I really need. Here is what I cannot compromise on. Can you meet me here? And if the answer is no, if you discover you are fundamentally incompatible, that is not failure. That is information. That is the gift of discovering the truth before the consequences become catastrophic. The uncomfortable conversations are not obstacles to intimacy, they are intimacy. The practice of seeing and being seen honestly rather than through projection. They transform marriage from a gamble into a deliberate construction, from an assumption of alignment into verified partnership. In the end, the design of enduring marriage is not found in passion's intensity but in the quality of its foundations. And those foundations are not built through avoidance, they are built through the courage to ask the questions that everyone warns you will kill the romance. Well, they will not kill the romance, they will kill the illusion. An illusion isn't worth building a life on. The real romance